You know, my wife is the incredible Amy Grant, a powerhouse singer and songwriter in her own right. And when it comes to this record, it is honestly just a massive testament to exactly how much I care about that woman. It really shows just how dear she is to me and how central she is in my life. I mean, let's be real. Vince Gill has solidified his status as absolute royalty in the scene, becoming one of country music's most celebrated artists. The man's resume is insane. His remarkable career has snagged him a whopping 22 Grammy Awards and 18 Country Music Association Awards. But now at 67 years young, Vince Gill has finally decided to break his silence on the big rumours. And let me tell you folks, this revelation changes the entire narrative. Half the fan base is popping champagne celebrating, while others are standing there, completely stunned, jaws on the floor. And naturally, you have a few skeptics asking, why on earth did he wait so long to spill the beans? You are going to want to stick with me on this one, because by the time we get to the end of this deep dive, you will either be totally shocked, incredibly relieved, or you will be seeing Vince Gill in a completely different light. So grab a drink and let's get right into the messy details. We're talking about the truth behind the Eagles membership. Vincent Grant Gill was practically born with a melody in his heart and music running through his veins. From the exact second he picked up that tiny 4-string tenor guitar as a little kid, it was like the universe had already mapped out his entire destiny in neon lights. And of course, being the prodigy he was, it didn't take long for him to level up to a full-size 6-string, because let's be honest here, some people are just put on this earth to play. His parents caught on pretty quick too. They weren't just tossing him toy guitars from the dollar store and calling it a day. No way they knew their son had that it factor. So by the time he was just 10 years old, they went all in and bought him a Gibson ES 335. That is a serious electric guitar for a seriously talented kid. And just like that, the fuse was lit and his musical journey was off and running at full speed. But seriously, who could have possibly imagined back then that this small town boy with a passion for strings would one day stand center stage as a legitimate member of one of the most legendary rock bands in human history? Life has a funny way of throwing unexpected curveballs. And for Vince Gill, one of the biggest curveballs came right after the tragic passing of Glenn Frey in 2016. People whispered that it was just idle gossip. They said the real story would never see the light of day. But now at 67, Vince Gill is finally speaking out, officially confirming the rumours that have dogged his steps for decades. Some fans are cheering, others are absolutely heartbroken, and the music industry itself may never be the same after this. So what exactly did he reveal, and why did he keep his mouth shut for this long? Keep watching, because this story is way bigger and more complicated than anyone ever expected. Now, if you were paying attention to the Eagles back in the day, you would remember just how shaky and uncertain everything felt. Glenn Frey wasn't just some random band member you could replace. He was the co-founder, the voice behind their biggest radio hits, and a totally irreplaceable presence on that stage. Don Henley himself admitted it, saying, "I don't see how we could possibly go out and play without the guy who started the band." And honestly, can you blame the guy? It is one thing to lose a guitar player, but to lose the person who is literally the soul and heartbeat of the group, that is a completely different kind of heartbreak. To the outside world, it really looked like the Eagles might be done for good, closing up shop forever. But clearly fate had some other plans in the works. And somewhere behind the velvet ropes, conversations were happening that no one could have predicted in a million years. Enter Vince Gill. Now, he didn't just wake up one random Tuesday and decide, hey, I think I'll go join the Eagles today. No, this was something way bigger. Something that unfolded quietly in the background while nobody was looking. The band's heavy hitter manager, Irving Azoff, reached out to Vince's manager, Larry Fitzgerald, and that is exactly where the wheels really started turning on this massive deal. And here is a little fun fact for you trivia buffs. Vince actually had a much deeper connection to the band than most people even realised at the time. After the Eagles originally broke up, he and Glenn Frey had actually shared the exact same manager. It is almost as if all these little puzzle pieces had been waiting in the wings to finally come together. But even with that insider connection, Vince wasn't sitting by the phone expecting an official invite to the big leagues. In fact, it completely blindsided him. Looking back on it, he admitted it is not something you can dream up and sit around and think about and want. But when the opportunity finally knocked on his door, oh, you better believe he didn't hesitate for a second. The moment they popped the question, his response was as smooth as ever. When do we leave? No overthinking, no second guessing, just pure unadulterated excitement. Because let's be honest, folks, if the Eagles ask you to join the band, you don't play coy. You say yes. You grab your favourite guitar and you get your butt on the road. But stepping into a lineup like the Eagles isn't as simple as just showing up and jamming out. These are some of the most iconic sacred songs in rock history. And Vince knew that he didn't want to come in there and try to change things up or make it about him. He wanted to honour the legacy, so he took a very careful, respectful approach when it came to their catalogue selecting songs that made sense for his voice and style. And let's just say he didn't pick the easy ones to coast on. He took on absolute classics like Lion, I's New Kid in Town, Take It to the Limit, and Tequila Sunrise. We are talking about songs that millions of fans hold near and dear to their hearts. And the thing is, he got it. He understood that these weren't just tracks on a vinyl. They were memories, moments, entire lifetimes wrapped up in the music. I can't imagine not hearing those songs and not hearing those iconic lines, the iconic backgrounds, everything that made the arrangement of those records so great. He explained to the press. So he committed to playing them note for note, sticking religiously to the original arrangements, because the absolute last thing he wanted to do was strip away what made them so magical in the first place. And then, of course, there is his dynamic with Don Henley. Now, this wasn't just a case of let's find a guy who can sing a tune and strum a guitar. The chemistry had to be perfect, and luckily Vince and Henley had already built a solid musical relationship over the years. Long before the Eagles gig was even a blip on the radar, Vince and Don Henley had already been grinding away in the studio on Henley's Cass County record. That foundation of trust. It was rock solid way before the offer came through. Naturally, when the news broke, the critics came out of the woodwork asking why on earth the Eagles would recruit a Nashville country cat. But Henley shut that noise down immediately with the perfect clapback. Don simply said he knows how to be in a band. That statement meant the world to Vince. See, he didn't walk into this legendary lineup trying to steal the thunder or hog the limelight. He wasn't auditioning to be the next Glenn Frey. Nobody could do that. Vince just wanted to serve the song, lay down some killer tracks and pay homage to the empire they had built over decades. Vince really summed it up perfectly when he famously said, "I don't have to have the attention. I don't need the spotlight on me." That level of humility is rare in this business. And honestly, that low-key professional attitude is exactly why he slid into the lineup so seamlessly. But let's talk about his debut, Dodger Stadium 2017. Talk about a trial by fire. The atmosphere was thick enough to cut with a knife. It wasn't just a gig, it was an emotional roller coaster for everyone involved. And the best part, Vince wasn't standing up there facing the heat alone. Glenn's son, Deacon Frey, was standing right beside him, stepping into his late father's shoes. Watching him up there was this gut-wrenching mix of heartbreaking tragedy and absolute beauty all wrapped into one. You could physically feel the heavy weight of the moment ripple through the crowd. This wasn't just another Friday night rock show. It was something monumental, something spiritual. It symbolised a legendary band finding the courage to forge ahead while frantically clinging to the legacy they created. Vince got that. He understood the assignment completely. He knew deep down this wasn't the Vince Gill show. It was about ensuring these timeless anthems continued to breathe and resonate for the fans. Now let's look at where we are. Fast forward to the present day, and Vince is still out on the road, tearing it up with the Eagles on their massive farewell tour, which is now scheduled to finally take its last bow in 2026. It's wild to think about. One day you're just a kid picking on a guitar in your bedroom, and the next you're belting out Take It to the Limit alongside rock royalty. You're standing there in front of tens of thousands of screaming fans, living out a script that feels like it was written by the music gods themselves. It's truly the stuff of legends. While Vince Gill has historically been the type of guy to let his guitar solos do the talking, the silence is finally breaking. For the first time in ages, he's addressing the whispers directly. At 67 years young, he's finally confirming what the tabloids have guessed at for decades, but trust me, nobody was actually ready for the raw truth he's dropping. The entire Nashville scene is buzzing with gossip. The fan base is absolutely flawed, and the music industry might never view this country icon in the same light ever again. You're going to want to stick around for this, folks, because these revelations change the whole narrative. Let's dive deep into the complicated saga of his marriage to Amy Grant. On the surface, the Vince Gill and Amy Grant romance reads like a paperback fairy tale, almost too perfect to be real. The origins trace all the way back to 1993 in Tulsa, Oklahoma. They were filming Christmas with Vince Gill. But this wasn't just your standard holiday variety show. This taping marked the exact second their universes collided in the most chaotic, beautiful way. It was the catalyst that crossed their paths when neither of them was looking for it, setting off a chain reaction that would eventually shake up their entire lives. Amy was already a massive superstar dominating the charts when she stepped onto that set as a guest. Just imagine the sheer amount of talent crammed into that one room. From the very first handshake, the air in the room shifted. There was an undeniable electric charge between them that you couldn't ignore if you tried. Vince recalls the scene like it happened yesterday. Amy walked into the rehearsal hall, and Vince, being the classic Southern gentleman, noticed she looked a little tense, her brow furrowed with stress. So what does he do? He walks right up to the Queen of Christian Pop and says, "Hey, unknit that brow. Everything is going to be all right." Pretty smooth operator, right? But all jokes aside, a genuine spark ignited in that fleeting moment that neither of them could extinguish. You can practically see it playing out like a movie scene. Vince was already mesmerised by her aura, but that interaction and that smile sealed the deal. While the attraction was there, the music was the real glue that bound them together. They ended up performing at 3 separate holiday extravaganzas that same year. Things kicked up a notch when Amy personally asked Vince to record a duet with her, the now classic House of Love. That's a pretty special request, don't you think? It wasn't just about laying down vocal tracks. That recording session really marked the genesis of a relationship that would eventually dominate headlines. But here's the kicker. Despite the fireworks going off, they both stayed in their lanes. Vince was still hitched to Janice Oliver, and Amy was married to Gary Chapman. They weren't reckless. They didn't just throw their vows out the window. They were trying desperately to respect their existing commitments. However, you can't hide a forest fire. The chemistry between them was so thick and palpable that everyone in the room and probably the next room over could feel the heat. Amy later confessed the energy was palpable to all of us. It was an undeniable magnetic pull that defied logic, but they were doing their best to ignore it. They navigated the situation with as much integrity as humanly possible, trying to keep things respectful and above board, even when their hearts were screaming something else. Let's be real, though, the public wasn't quite as understanding. The stretch between 1993 and 1999 was brutal for both of them. Amy actually refers to that period as those long years. The unspoken attraction and deep connection made every interaction incredibly complicated and emotionally draining. Imagine how agonising that must have been, knowing you found your soulmate but being unable to do a single thing about it because of the rings on your fingers. They knew the only righteous path was to respect the boundaries they had set, denying their feelings for the sake of their promises. But the outside world... They didn't care about the nuance. The rumour mill churned out the worst possible scenarios, painting them as villains before anything even happened. They faced a tidal wave of judgment. Vince later reflected on the cruelty of it all, noting how painful it was that most people assume the worst of us. He insisted it was unfair and totally incorrect. And isn't that just classic society? People love to write the script in their heads without knowing a single fact. Despite the masses jumping to scandalous conclusions, Vince and Amy didn't let the noise break them. They kept their heads down and tried to survive the scrutiny. They maintained their integrity even as that gravitational pull grew stronger with every passing day. But life, as it always does, forced the issue eventually. Finally, the dam broke. In 1997, Vince's divorce hit the headlines like a bomb, a development that actually caught Amy completely by surprise. Nobody really expected things to move at that lightning speed, which honestly just made the whole situation feel incredibly raw and real. Let's rewind the tape to 1999. Amy's marriage was effectively crumbling before our eyes. She had always hinted that her union with Gary was rocky from the get-go, dealing with issues behind closed doors. And finally, after 17 long years, they called it quits. It was a brutal season for her, no doubt, but it was also the turning point that opened the door for her and Vince. They were finally free to explore their connection without any red tape or guilty consciences holding them back. Once those divorce papers were signed, Amy didn't drag her feet. She wasted absolutely zero time confirming her romance with Vince. I mean, we are talking fast. Just 4 months later, they went public and made it official. That is when the puzzle pieces really snapped into place for the couple. By March of the year 2000, they were standing at the altar in a stunning open-air ceremony just outside of Nashville. It wasn't a massive celebrity spectacle. It was super intimate with only about 80 guests, and the most important part was having their kids right there to witness their new beginning. They didn't try to force a square peg into a round hole. They just let the love flow naturally, and clearly it worked out for the best. Looking back at how Vince and Amy went from a simple Christmas special gig in 1993 to a lifelong power couple is absolute magic. It really goes to show that the best chapters in life often start when you aren't even looking for them. Sometimes you just have to sit back, be patient, and let the universe do its thing. And when the stars align, everything just falls into place. Now, few artists in the industry command as much respect and admiration as the legendary Vince Gill. The man is an icon, but even legends get caught up in the gossip mill eventually. Now, at 67 years old, the country star is finally stepping up to the microphone. He is breaking his silence and confirming what fans have been theorising about for ages. The public reaction. Totally overwhelming. Some are floored while others feel vindicated. And plenty of folks are left scratching their heads, asking for the full truth. So what is the real story here? Stick around because we are about to spill the tea. Let's talk about standing by your partner when the chips are down. Vince Gill and Amy Grant's romance hasn't just been sunshine and rainbows. They have weathered some serious storms. But nothing, and I mean nothing, put their vows to the test quite like the medical nightmares they tackled together. It all kicked off back in 2020, and let's keep it real. When life decides to throw you a curveball, it doesn't lob it underhand. It throws a fastball right at your head with full force. Vince was actually at his own routine doctor's appointment when his physician, maybe just following a gut feeling, suggested Amy should come in for a checkup too. Who could have predicted that a passing comment like that would completely shatter their reality? But that is exactly how it played out, turning their world upside down. Amy went in for the screening and boom, the doctors found a rare congenital heart defect known as PAPVR. It sounds like a mouthful because it is complicated. We are talking about a condition that only affects roughly 1 in 143 people. The most terrifying detail, she had been walking around with this ticking time bomb her entire life and had zero clue it was even there. Just imagine getting blindsided by a diagnosis like that on a random Tuesday. This wasn't a take 2 aspirin and call me in the morning scenario. The specialist looked her in the eye and said if they didn't fix this immediately, the consequences could be absolutely catastrophic. Can you imagine the fear? Amy, always the trooper, tried to take it in stride. But, you know, Vince's stomach probably dropped right to the floor. So in June of 2020, right in the thick of a global pandemic when hospitals were basically war zones, they had to make a move. Amy had to go in for full-blown open heart surgery. Let's just take a beat to let that sink in. We aren't talking about a minor cosmetic touch-up. This is chest-cracking, life-altering surgery where recovery is a beast. This was serious business, and as if the operation itself wasn't already a gigantic mountain to climb, they had the nightmare of COVID-19 protocols making every single step 10 times more stressful. Vince, being the devoted husband he is, was desperate to be in that room. But strict hospital restrictions meant his ability to visit was severely limited. Picture sitting at home, staring at the walls, knowing the love of your life is going through something so intense and dangerous. And you can't even be there to hold her hand. He finally got the green light to see her after enduring what must have felt like the longest, most agonising wait of his entire existence. If we have to find a silver lining in all that madness, it is this. The pandemic had wiped Vince's tour schedule clean. He had nowhere else to be, so he could dedicate every waking second to Amy's recovery. And that is exactly where he stayed. Just when they started to feel like they could finally exhale, life decided to remind them who is boss. Fast forward to July of 2022, and out of nowhere another crisis struck. It seemed like the universe wasn't done with them yet. Amy was out for a bike ride near a golf course, probably just soaking up the peaceful afternoon when she hit a massive pothole. She went flying. Now we have all taken a spill on a bike before, but this wasn't a dust yourself off and get back up situation. It was a freak accident. She suffered a traumatic brain injury that shook the whole family to its core. And yes, thank goodness she was wearing a helmet. But even that couldn't fully protect her from the force of the impact. She was rushed to the ER. Vince didn't hesitate for a split second. He cancelled 3 upcoming concerts right on the spot because nothing else mattered. He had to be there for Amy. The road to recovery was not going to be a walk in the park. It was going to be a marathon. Her memory took a serious hit, and doctors estimated it would take 12 to 18 months for her brain to fully rewire itself. Can you imagine the frustration of losing bits of your life, struggling to recall a simple conversation, and because when it rains, it pours? She later had to go under the knife again to remove a throat cyst, followed by shoulder surgery. It felt like they were taking hit after hit, but Vince remained her rock. He literally refused to leave her side for a single second. He became her absolute anchor, that steady hand guiding her through a Category 5 hurricane. He kept reassuring her that crazy things happen to good people every single day of the week, and all you can really do is take it one breath at a time. He would say, "We are right here and I love you more than anything." And honestly, sometimes those few simple words were the only lifeline that actually kept her from falling apart. She later confessed that hearing him repeat that mantra day in and day out was the only reason she survived the entire nightmare with her sanity intact. Because let's face it, when life decides to throw the whole kitchen sink at you, knowing you have a ride or die partner in your corner changes the whole game. Country icon Vince Gill has spent literal decades holding audiences in the palm of his hand with that velvety voice and those lyrics that just hit different. But the second the curtains close, the rumour mill paints a totally different, darker picture. Now approaching 69 in 2026, he is finally stepping up to shut down the wild speculation once and for all. And let me tell you, the fan base is completely shook. It begs the question, what exactly has this man been burying deep in the vault all these years? And why on earth pick this specific moment to spill the tea? You are going to want to stick around for this one because his confession basically flips the script on everything we thought we knew. Let's talk about that musical evolution. Nearing his 70th birthday, Vince has built a legacy that 99% of musicians would kill for. But the thing that is truly mind-blowing is that even after grinding for decades, the man is still evolving. You would assume that after stacking up 22 Grammys and cementing his status as one of the absolute gods of country music, he would just kick back on a porch somewhere, sip some iced tea and coast on his royalties, right? But nope, he is still out here grinding, still pushing the envelope and finding fresh ways to craft music that feels authentic. And honestly, if you sat him down and asked him, he would look you in the eye and tell you he is penning the absolute best material of his entire life right now. We are not talking about the tracks that hit #1 or the ones getting heavy rotation on pop radio, but the songs that actually pack a punch and mean something. And at the end of the day, isn't that the whole point of making music? He isn't out here chasing TikTok trends or trying to copy-paste his hits from the 90s. He is just creating pure art from a place of total honesty. These days, Vince looks at songwriting through a completely different lens than he did back in his glory days. He isn't showing up to pass. judgment or point fingers at anyone. He just wants to sit back and observe the human condition. Life gets messy. People go through hell. And he wants to bottle up those raw moments without dictating how the listener should feel about them. That is a massive pivot from the way so many chart toppers are engineered today, isn't it? Most artists are just plugging variables into a formula, but Vince, he knows better. He has been in this ruthless industry long enough to get that real songwriting isn't about churning out content just to feed the algorithm. It is all about sitting still with a concept and letting it actually breathe. He has gone on record saying that if you try to force a song without a solid spark, you will just end up spinning your wheels in the mud. And let's be real, that level of wisdom is something you only earn after decades in the trenches. And while we are on the subject of experience, we have to talk about his collabs. The guy has always been the ultimate team player, but lately he has gotten super intentional about who he shares the studio with. And it is not just about clout chasing with big names. It is strictly about vibing with artists who bring something totally fresh, electric and exciting to the table. He has dipped his toes into basically every musical pool out there, crossing over from country to pop with icons like Kelly Clarkson to classic rock with the legendary Eagles and back to traditional roots with the hungry up-and-comers. And the coolest part, he could not care less about grabbing the credit. Seriously, he has said it before, when you stop worrying about whose name is in lights and who gets the plaque, that is when the real studio magic happens. That humble mindset alone is exactly why he is still one of the most sought-after guys to work with in the entire country music scene. He walks into every project with zero pretension, which is like finding a unicorn in an industry where egos are usually bigger than the actual songs themselves. But what is really fascinating to watch is how his actual sound has morphed over the years. He has always had his boots planted deep in traditional country soil, but he is smart enough to know that music evolves with every single new generation. And instead of being the old man yelling at clouds and fighting that change, he opens his arms to it. He still grips tight to those classic elements that define the genre, but he is totally game for new sounds, new influences and fresh ways of expressing his soul. At 69, you would expect him to pump the brakes, but he is slamming on the gas. He is more connected to his roots than ever before, especially through his dedication to the Grand Ole Opry. He is constantly obsessing over how a track would resonate on that legendary wooden stage, running every single riff through that mental filter. And that is exactly what keeps his feet on the ground. He is always evolving, always learning, always growing. But deep down at the core, he is still that same kid who fell head over heels for music all those years ago, and that right there, that is what makes him a living legend. All right, guys, that wraps up today's deep dive. Thanks so much for hanging out. If you dug this story, make sure to smash that like button. Drop a comment below and subscribe so you never miss the juice. For more thrilling stories just like this one, go ahead and click on the video popping up right now on your screen. You do not want to miss it.